Scott McNair, injury attorneys, we fight for the win.
Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the Overrule Podcast, brought to you by the Scott McNair Law Firm. We have an exciting episode today. My guest is the president of the Louisiana Association for Justice, Brian Katz, also a partner in a storied and historic law firm in New Orleans, started by, I believe, was Russ one of the founders, or was it his father?
Russ's dad and Russ's uncle.
Okay. And it's had some iterations over the year, because how long has your firm been open for, Brian?
We have been open since 1944.
Wow.
Just a couple years before I was born.
Wow. And now the firm's iteration, for many years it was Herman, Katz, and Kotler, and now it is...
It's Herman, Katz, Giselson, and Kane.
Okay. And so just to brag on Brian and his firm a little bit, Brian's firm has been lead counsel in the biggest litigation in American history, which is the BP litigation. A friend of ours, Steve Herman, a role model of mine, who was involved in that, obviously, with all the other lawyers at the firm, and been counsel in a lot of big cases besides that. Propulsid, maybe?
Propulsid and Chinese drywall and
Yep.
BP, we talked about BP. The Brightfield case where the boat, the vessel hit the Riverwalk back in 1995, 96, something like that.
Yep.
Those type of cases.
And some big individual cases, too,
Yep.
not all class actions. But in your for everybody who doesn't know, who is unsure of what the Louisiana Association for Justice is, Brian, because you're the president of that organization now, could you kind of just tell them briefly a little bit about what that is and what your role with the organization is?
Sure. So Louisiana Association for Justice, or LAJ, is an association that represents only plaintiff lawyers. So only represents people like you and I who represent individuals who have either been injured or somehow damaged. And we basically lobby for laws or other important issues on behalf of the civil justice system, really, and access to courts and allowing our clients to have their day in court and to be fully compensated to the extent they're damaged. And that's essentially what we do. We put on CLEs. We do a lot of different things like that, but we've kind of also ultimately become the protector of the citizens' right to access to courts.
Yeah. And it's just to distill that down for people who don't know, because you're living it right now, and we're really about to get into what's happening in Baton Rouge at the Capitol right now as it relates to tort legislation. The insurance industry, just take them, and we'll maybe go to the alcohol industry too, right? Every industry that is a big industry has lobbyists or different lobbying firms who represent their interests at the state and federal level. Is that fair? Can you maybe just generally explain that?
Yeah, essentially, all business interests have lobbyists who are at the Capitol and at the legislature, like they were today and yesterday and last week, since the session's been open for about a week and a half, and they are all actively lobbying for laws to be passed to help them in their industry, either on a tax issue, on a legal issue, or something that gives them either an equal footing to compete in the state of Louisiana or a bigger footing to compete in the state of Louisiana.
Yeah. And I think people may not be aware in their day-to-day lives, right? Like, you're a teacher, you're an industry worker, you're going on about your life. You're not really paying attention to what's happening in Baton Rouge. But all these industries do have money that they allocate to lobby for them, whether it's the alcohol industry, the tobacco industry, the insurance industry, and really, to kind of distill down what LAJ does at its core is, the factory worker in Gretna or the offshore worker down in Cutoff, like, they don't have a lobby, right? And they don't know if they're ever going to need a lobby. But if they get to court one day because they've been injured on a rig or a tool at their workplace cuts their finger off, you don't think these things are going to happen. But in what you've done for a long time, what I've done now for 14 years, we see it all. These things happen. The LAJ is essentially the only voice, essentially, at the legislature every session, fighting to protect the rights that they have as far as access to the courts and the individual things in their particular cases, whether it be a workers' compensation case or an injury case. Is that just about right?
Yeah, you nailed it. There's not another group that that does what LAJ does in terms of trying to assist an injured party and making sure that they are able to go to court to present their case, and that the laws are fair to them when they present their case, and essentially to make sure that the system isn't rigged against the individual who has to fight an insurance company who has unlimited dollars to try to not necessarily rig the system, but make it much more difficult for someone who has been hurt to be successful in their attempts to either make a claim against the insurance company or sue the insurance company.
Yeah. And let's just be honest about it, right, Brian? I mean, the premise of the tort system, as we learned in law school, if you believe in free markets, if you believe in small and limited government, you should be a favor of the tort system, because the point is, while the industry, whether it be the Chamber of Commerce or lobby locally or some of these different industries, have really ginned up consumer, I think, fervor against some of the marketing advertisers in the plaintiff side, maybe some of it justified. They've used that to really drive a wedge, in my opinion, in the public, to have animus against the court system and big verdicts. But really, you want a big verdict because you want a trucking company, for example, from my perspective, to care about drug testing and different systems that they have in place to prevent, if at all possible, a driver from driving while they're influenced and killing somebody in your family. And that financial detriment is a lever, a policy lever, which incentivizes a company to prevent claims, much like, in my opinion, we have seen in the oil industry. Think about how little claims we have compared to what there were in the 80s or 90s because of the safety measures that have been put in place as far as getting workers offshore, moving them on and about rigs, on vessels. The claims are very different. And if you go talk to maritime defense lawyers, they'll tell you, like, my business has dried up because there has been such an emphasis on safety because those verdicts have given them financial incentive to protect the workers. And so I guess I'd like you to speak a little bit on that, because it really frustrates me, the cultivation I'm seeing out there right now, because we're in the tort legislation season. I'm not going to call it tort reform because it's not reforming anything, but the tort legislation season. And I want people to just think about that, like that system being there to protect their families and them.
Yeah, I mean, the only way you can be, if you get hurt, the only way we can compensate you is through money. And the only way we can do that is through the court system. At the same time, we all hope that nobody wants to get hurt, and not $1 million or $10 million or $100 million can ever replace whatever injury you've ultimately sustained if it's a life-altering injury. Nobody wants that money. So safety is ultimately the goal, and it should be the goal for insurance companies, for companies who are operating trucks, who are operating rigs. Yep. And the only way that we can hold them accountable is through the court system. And in Louisiana, we have a unique system because you can get what we call compensatory damages that compensate you for your injuries, which are broken down into your pain and suffering and your medical bills and your wages, to oversimplify it. But you can't get what we call punitive damages except in very limited circumstances. And punitive damages are to punish the company for their conduct if they're egregiously unsafe, for instance. So the only way we can do it is through compensatory damages, and ultimately, what we as trial lawyers do make things safer. You can go back to the Ford Pinto where the gas tank blew up. That was the location of the gas tank was changed because of trial lawyers, and because of a case. The McDonald's coffee case. People want to talk about it all the time, but if you dig down into the facts of that McDonald's at the time overheated the coffee to such a level that it was I don't remember what it was, 100 and something or several hundred degrees.
They were doing it on purpose to preserve the coffee for longer.
Well, not only to preserve the coffee for longer, but to drag more coffee out of the bean to make it go longer. Mm-hmm. So they were profiting off of this, and the poor lady who spilled the coffee because it was between her legs, she suffered significant burns to her private parts down there, which was life-altering. And the only way you have access the only way you can stop some of this behavior is through the court system.
And everybody knows that story. Miles is nodding over there. And it's amazing that when you dig into that case, it was egregious what McDonald. I love McDonald's. They have great fries. Best. I love their Fountain Diet Coke. But like they actually have good coffee too. By the way, I like coffee, and I actually like McDonald's coffee. But like if you dig into the case, exactly what you said, she was severely burned in a very sensitive area that affected her sex life and her life. And it was proven to the jury that they were doing this on purpose for financial reasons, and they were punished.
Right. And it's interesting that you brought up the jury, which is, I think, is a very hot topic in Louisiana right now because, we try these cases in state court to 12 jurors of our peers. They are regular people from that community, and they listen to the evidence. They listen to the instructions of the law by the judge, and they make a decision based on their real life experiences. They don't look at old cases. They don't look at anything else other than their own experiences, and they make decisions that are mostly reasonable.
Yeah.
You hear things about nuclear verdicts and things like that. Well, there's some conduct on the defendant side or the company side or the insurance company side that really made the jury act in a way that they did. Now, is it to compensate the plaintiff for the significant injuries? Is it to punish? Is it a combination of both? But it's the jury that makes that decision, and that is, even in Louisiana, or I should say, especially in Louisiana lately, the legislature has gone to a philosophy of let the jury decide rather than a judge deciding. And in order to get a jury trial, your case only has to be worth $5,000 now. And we get complaints from insurance companies and businesses about what they call nuclear verdicts, which are really just fairly compensating the plaintiff for whatever injury or damage they sustained. And they complain about what the jury has done. But in reality, the legislature is the one who wants these jurors to decide based on their own life experience what the damages should be. So it's just it's kind of a hot topic. It happened, there was some changes to the laws last year that reduced the jury trial, maybe it was 2020, reduced the jury trial threshold to $5,000 to make it easier for insurance company and businesses to get a jury trial. And
they wanted that. They said that was, just so we're clear, the last time that passed, I remember that was in 2020 or 2021, both Jim Donnellan, who was the insurance commissioner at that time, as well as Stephen Wagasback, who was the head of Lobby, both under oath promised, and in media, you can go look it up, said our insurance rates are going to go down if you pass these laws in 2021. Spoiler alert, they didn't go down. And on nuclear verdicts, I think it's important for people to realize this phrasing of it. I mean, we have St. Tammany Parish is one of the most conservative. Like, a jury's not, everybody knows, like, it's very hard to get a very large award out of St. Tammany Parish. And whenever you get these large awards, just as well as I do, and our listeners should, I like to say, look, this isn't a good situation. Somebody's dead, somebody burned alive, or somebody's got 3 to 6 surgeries and they're going to be in a wheelchair or have some level of disabling injuries for the rest of their life. Yeah. You don't just get these huge awards that the courts of appeal uphold. In fact, we've had recent jurisprudence in the last year or two from the Supreme Court, the primary case being Pete, that you're not, if you don't have multiple surgeries and a justification for it, you're not holding a 2 or 3 or more than $2 or $3 million general damage award for surgeries. Like, so some of this stuff gets reduced on appeal. It's not like these awards hold. But St. Tammany Parish gave, I think it was last year, there was a $129 million verdict. That little girl that was killed in the school line, it was shown, the jury found the school was grossly, and I doubt they're going to collect it all, depending on how much insurance available. But the point is, the jury found it was grossly negligent what the school did. They set up a running club without telling the parents for all these kids. It was horrible. It was the way they set it up. They were having the kids run through ongoing traffic without any precautions or safety mechanisms in place. And a jury in the most conservative parish gave a $129 million verdict to send a message like, these are our kids. Like, you have to protect them. Okay. And so when I see these things going down the pike right now in Baton Rouge about like damage caps, and the jury should only be able to award certain amounts of money, of course, I think there's constitutional challenges to it to start. And 14 states have ruled them unconstitutional based on their state constitutions. But number two, what is your kid's life worth? Is that up to the jury or to some guy or girl who's going to be sitting in a state legislative seat for like 2 or 4 years and doing what some lobbyist that Geico told him to do, So in any event, I'm going to go on a soapbox here, but tell us about what's going on in Baton Rouge right now, Brian. Because every this time of year has become like tort legislation between LAJ and the insurance company season. So please let our listeners know.
So I wrote an article about this. It seems like every one of my president's articles for LAJ has been about something going on up in Baton Rouge and someone trying to take away the rights of our clients or access to the courts. And I joked that, we've got hunting season, we've got football season, and we've got tort reform season, which is the legislative session. And so right now we are in the midst, it started a week and a half ago, I think April 14th or so, of a fiscal legislative session. What that means is that the legislature is supposed to be working on budgets and tax measures and things that you would normally associate with the term fiscal.
Yeah.
Each legislator, despite it being a fiscal session, can file 5 bills that are unrelated to fiscal matters. And
how does that compare, Brian, to what they usually get if it's not a fiscal session?
Oh, it's thousands of bills.
Okay, so they're really limited to what they can file.
They're very limited. They've got to be much more organized about what they really want to accomplish. It's in the session in 2024, I think it was about 1,200 or so bills. I may be off on that number, but it felt like it was at least 1,000 plus bills, and a lot of them go by the wayside or get combined or get dropped, but they can literally throw a bunch of spaghetti on the wall and see what sticks in a non-fiscal session. In a fiscal session, they got to be much more targeted. And with that target, what they've done is there's about 41 bills that were pre-filed that dealt with some access to court issues, some changes to the laws of people who have been injured, and the like. And so essentially what is happening in the last week and a half, the session's only a week and a half old, they've had hearings in the House Civil Law Committee and the House Insurance Committee and in the Senate Insurance Committee, and today in the Senate Jude A, which is Judiciary A Committee, dealing with some of these laws. And we can go into the laws that are being proposed and what the impetus is behind it if you want. I think the impetus behind it is important for your listeners to know, is that we have arguably an insurance rate or premium crisis in the personal auto realm. In other words, we're all paying way too much for the auto insurance that we now have.
Yeah.
And that's universal across the state. The citizens of the state are complaining to the governor, to the legislature, to the commissioner of insurance that our rates are too high. And what the legislators are trying to do now, and they've been working on it since the fall with monthly hearings, is trying to figure out a way to reduce those rates. And now that we've got to the session, they use the information they gathered in meetings in September, October, November of 2024 and January and February of 2025 to put these package of bills together to try to get rates reduced or try to enact laws that will ultimately result in rate reduction.
Lower auto premiums.
Yeah.
Yep.
What we do know, I'll throw this out here first, is that there are a ton of these bills that attack our clients and their rights. And what has been proven in Louisiana and across the country is tort reform bills, however you want to phrase it, civil justice reform, access to court reform, does not reduce premiums. The General Counsel of the American Tort Reform Association has admitted that. The president of the American Tort Reform Association has admitted that. We've got quotes from a host of insurance industry people who say tort reform will not reduce rates. And so that's the premise that we as trial lawyers start from. So we try to figure out, what will reduce rates?
Well, can I ask you before we go to that, though, Brian, in the history of Louisiana, because I got into this rabbit hole the other day, because the governor was very fervently, to the insurance industry's chagrin, testifying against a lot of their claims that some of these things that they're proposing through the legislators would reduce rates. And he went back, I think somebody who was, his last name's Brown. He may have been on, there used to be a rate committee in Louisiana, which the insurance companies, I believe in 07 and 08, convinced the legislature you have to remove this and this will reduce rates, and it's a shocker, it didn't. Yeah. But it sounds like since 1976 we've had some level of tort reform measures being promised to reduce rates in Louisiana. I was hoping you could kind of talk through that history a bit.
So I actually have a chronology sitting in front of me, and the first act was 1975, the Medical Malpractice Act.
Okay.
It capped damages, general damages, at $500,000 back in 1975. That cap is still in effect.
Right.
I actually had a very interesting conversation today with one of our members who was up in Baton Rouge testifying in front of Jude this afternoon on medical malpractice, more reform on there in that realm. And when in 1975, premiums for doctors were right in the middle. We were 25th out of 50 states in how much our doctors were paying in premiums. Today, the cap is still at $500,000, which in today's dollars is $2.2 million. It has not been increased. But today, we are the 8th most expensive place to get insurance, medical malpractice insurance. So doctors are paying.
Infuriating.
So it clearly isn't based on caps or things like that. And so in 1975, it started Medical Malpractice Act.
So doctors are paying more now.
Correct.
Than what they were at before the cap was put in place.
Comparatively, yes.
Yeah.
And, it went on. In 1983, they had a big push on workers' comp, and it became a no-fault system, and it limited what the people who were injured on the job could receive as a result of those injuries, although they didn't have to prove fault. And then in 85, we had a cap on general liability and tort claims against the state. Yep. Which is $500,000. I think it's still the same. Yep. And we weakened the joint and several liability in 1987. We had a Products Liability Act in 1988. 1996 was a big push under Governor Mike Foster, and strict liability was abolished. We got punitive damages for some toxic damages were repealed. In 1997, there was the No Pay, No Play Act, and it kind of continued, and it happened under Kathleen Blanco as well, with immunity for mold damage claims not caused by defects in workmanship, things like that. And in 2020 was the last big. It was called the Civil Justice Reform Act of 2020. That's where we talked about reduced the jury trial threshold by $40,000, repealed the direct action statute in part, changed the collateral source rule.
And collateral source just simply means, for those not a lawyer, like the amount of money you can recover. For example, before these changes, if you were on health insurance and you were in a car accident, even though the health insurer only paid $40 of a $100 bill, you could still recover the full $100 billed amount from the tort fees. I mean, the person who hit you, the person who was at fault, whether it be a car accident, offshore incident, whatever it is. And the concept was simple, also based in personal and individual liberties, that if you were responsible enough to pay for premiums, which your health insurer then negotiated those discounted rates to give you a benefit, then a third party who is at fault in injuring you should not get the benefit, and you should collect the full amount. You can't do that anymore. Insurance companies promise if they changed that and modified that back in 2020, the rates would go down. Did the rates go down?
No, they didn't. Yeah. It's interesting. When you talk about the collateral source rule, if you think about it, you're paying for health insurance. And like you said, you're being responsible in doing that. You use your health insurance to get treatment for damages that somebody else caused you by running into the back of you or however they damaged you. And your health insurance is what legal people call your patrimony. But what it really is it is your property right. You have paid for something that you are getting the benefit for. And what they were trying to do is, and they're still trying to do, is take that property right away from you. It's no different than taking away your land.
Yep.
Or your car. It's you own it. You've paid for it. They don't want to give you the benefit of it under the guise of reducing premiums, because if the insurance company, if Allstate or State Farm or Geico or whoever hits you, and they are now getting the benefit of you being a responsible citizen and having health insurance and using your health insurance to pay your doctors. And what we argued back then in 2020, because we were dealing with a majority of legislators that were against us, we had to work out a deal. And what we did was we said, all right, well, we'll only get back what we paid, but what the health insurance company paid, but we'll get a 40% quote unquote kicker for what we paid as injured people for our health insurance. So we can get, let's say the bill was $100,000, the medical bill was $100,000, and insurance paid $30,000. We could get the $30,000, and then we would take the difference between the 30 and the 100, and we would get 40% of that to compensate us for paying for a health insurance.
Right.
And that was supposed to reduce rates. It didn't. The seatbelt usage, that you used to be able to not be able to say if you didn't use a seatbelt in an accident. And interestingly, that was supposed to reduce rates specifically, according to actuarial calculations, by 5%. The seatbelt law was repealed. Now evidence of seatbelt use can be used in trials. Rates went up.
Yeah.
There is zero proof anywhere that rates will go down as a result of changing laws that affect people who have been injured in accidents. It's just not. There is no data to support that. Anybody who says it is speculating, number one, and they're not looking at history, because history says it doesn't.
Well, I'd like to see, and you have the timeline right there, and so that's my 2 cents, and I think the governor said it the other day, is if you had a historical record of any of these things when they pass actually affecting a downward trend in rates, then we'd be saying, okay, well, now we're on to something. Like, how did this work? Maybe there's something similar we do at work. But, you read out the record in Louisiana. It's never reduced rates, not once. And so we know that, but let's shift gears, if you could, a bit, Brian. I want to start talking about, we know auto insurance is, Louisiana in the last couple of years has been in the top 5 highest premiums comparatively in the country. And so we know it's an issue. We're like, how do we make it cheaper? What goes into that? And I want to introduce the concept to our listeners of the loss ratio in a very simple term, because when you kind of started talking to me about it, it went over my head. You sent me some information. I went down a research rabbit hole. Simply put, it is insurance company takes premium in, $1 from you for your insurance, whatever it costs you each month, $200, $300, $150, $100. And then at some point in time, they may have to pay out a claim. And so the loss ratio is how much money they take in versus what they have to pay out. And that's publicly available by the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. Anybody go look up. And as I understand it, Louisiana has a 69 loss ratio in the auto sector. Why don't you maybe talk through what the loss ratio is in the auto sector and what that is compared to other states, et cetera? Sure.
So the loss ratio, you've nailed it. It's premium dollars in versus what is to be paid out or has been paid out. So the difference between those is the quote unquote profit that the insurance company makes. And in Louisiana in 2022, it was 59.8. And in 23, it was 57.1. So in 2022, we were the 16th most profitable state for insurers, and in the personal auto sector. And in 2023, we were the 8th most profitable for insurers in that same space. And that compares nationwide. We are 9 points better in 22 and about 8 points better in 23 as compared to nationwide. So auto insurers are doing better in Louisiana as compared to the average nationwide. Even more importantly than the comparison to nationwide is comparison to our neighbors, Texas, Arkansas, and Mississippi. So just to give you an example, we'll go with 2023 numbers. Arkansas was the least profitable insurance for insurers. Mississippi was 38. Texas was 35. So we were 8. So we are doing far better. Our insurers are doing far better in Louisiana than they are doing in our neighboring states. And it's important to know that because our premiums are sometimes twice as much as what they are in the neighboring states. So the easiest way, in my opinion, it's easy to reduce those premiums, but the insurance commissioner has to do that, and he has to have the power to do that, and it's not being done. You can scream tort reform till the cows come home, but it's not going to change anything. But there are things that we can change, especially when you look at the hard data, to make it more affordable for the citizens of the state of Louisiana.
Okay, and so the next thing I want to ask you, because what I've seen the insurance commissioner say is, well, you're not when you talk about loss ratio, you're looking at pure income in and profit. You're not factoring in insurance industry expenses. And so let me just ask a real basic question. I'm generally curious. I looked at the loss ratio stuff that you sent me. I looked at the NAIC website. A lot of this is publicly available. The insurance commissioner says that the NAIC is the gold standard of data. Where do I go find the expenses that Louisiana insurers spent because the last thing I saw at the legislature is they're claiming they're losing 7% in the auto sector in Louisiana. And so just using common sense, not as a lawyer, I'm like, well, these two things don't fucking make any sense. Like, how can they be making this much money when you look comparatively at the other states, but then claim that they're losing 7%? Like, so where do we go find the expenses? So
arguably, you would go to the Department of Insurance and ask for them to provide you information on each company that writes in Louisiana. And we have all the major companies right here. There is not a competition problem here. And you would be able to get that information from the insurance department. But you can't do that in Louisiana because it's not publicly available.
Lovely.
Right. It's not transparent. And it's not published openly, which would, if you really think about the free market economy, is if Allstate had to say what their expenses were, and whether it's advertising, CEO, adjusters, office space, every other expense that we all need to operate a business, and then Geico and State Farm and Allstate and all those others would have to do the same thing. They can see it and they can be more competitive. They would be more competitive. And so the problem is that it's one of the recommendations that we as an association have made to the legislature through an expert, through a former commissioner of insurance for the from Missouri and an assistant commissioner of insurance from New Jersey, is to publish that data.
Yeah.
So that we can all see it, and then it would drive competition amongst the Big 10, so to speak.
It would also allow us to have an honest discussion about all this, right? I mean, like, I generally would like to see it, and the fact that they won't share it makes me very suspicious. And I think there's a salient point to make, which is insurance is not really a true free market in the auto sector. It is in property, kind of. But in auto, people are legally required or supposed to have it. So it's not really a free market. Like, the state is mandating these companies have clients. And so I feel like it's a very nakedly transparent, false argument to say you can't use the loss ratio, which is the only thing we have available to look at their profitability, and you're not factoring in expenses. Oh, but by the way, we won't show you the expenses. Like, in what universe where me and you walk into a court would a judge or a jury buy that freaking argument?
Right.
Exactly. And so one of the things too I wanted you to talk about, and I wanted at least the listeners to think about, is when you talk about loss ratio there, like Warren Buffett, I'm a big fan of his. He has openly said over and over again, go research it, he got into the insurance industry because it's one of the best businesses in the world. He's like, I get the capital up front, I get to invest it, They call it float legal. And by the way, great business. What's wrong with it? Like, I'm glad the insurance companies do this. We want them to be solvent to be able to insure us all. We take your premium dollars. There are regulations on it, as I understand, but they can go invest it in AAA bonds, highest rated bonds. They can go and invest it in real estate that the insurance commissioner or regulatory bodies approve, which is lower loan to value. Like maybe the property has 50% loan of insurance money compared to the value, so it's not at real risk of the insurance company going under. But they can go and invest our money and make profits on that, which is great, until they have to pay out the claim. But I don't think that is even reported in this loss ratio. So they're making more money investing premiums outside of what they even report, as I understand it. Is that a fair assessment?
That's 100% accurate.
Okay.
I've been trying to think of another business that has it as good as insurance. Because if you think about it, they get paid up front.
Yeah.
They go invest it, like you said. And then they promise you that they'll pay you, but what they do is not always intentionally, but they do delay just by the nature of a claim. Claim takes a while. You have to prove up your claim. So they've now had your premium for several years in the market or wherever they choose to invest it. If they're good investors, great. When the market's up, they're booming. And if it's average, and hopefully they got some money in the bonds and it's working well. But there's no other business that sells you the promise. You pay up front and you get the promise of something later. Maybe when you buy season tickets to the Saints or the Pelicans, you just got to send your money in February for the Saints, and you don't get your tickets till whenever, and they get to invest your money for that 6-month period.
Yeah.
But that's about it. I mean, there's really I've tried to think of some other businesses that are that good, and Warren Buffett loves to talk about Geico and loves to talk about the float because it's free money to him.
Yeah, and I think he's grown Berkshire to his benefit. Good for him. Like by utilizing that capital. Another thing I wanted you to talk about, Brian, is what's going on in Florida, which is something nobody seems to be talking about, but I'm watching it. Is the insurance companies, for example, in Baton Rouge right now, are saying they have a 7% loss in auto. They sold tort reform to Governor DeSantis in the legislature in Florida a year or two ago, and they reported that they were losing all this money, of course, right on the back of a ton of hurricanes unfortunately hitting. I mean, when you have to pay a bunch of claims, it's common sense. Like, they're probably not going to be the best years when you have devastating hurricanes like Florida's had in the last 3 or 4 years. But there's been a big scandal because there were apparently studies which were stopped or were not fully disclosed. And it's this concept of a third party. Let me use one basic concept. An insurance company very rarely now is adjusting a consumer's claim internally. A lot of times, especially the property insurers, they have a third-party adjusting company who comes out and adjusts the loss. A big one in our industry is Sedgwick. But some of the insurers own their own adjusting companies, and then they're not regulated the same as the insurance company. And then the adjusting company in this hypothetical can then charge the insurance company a rate which shows as an expense and decreases profitability. And if it's not a market rate, then they're being profitable in another company that's not regulated by the insurance commissioner, and then saying the insurance company is losing money. Do we have any regulatory agency in Louisiana reporting whether that's happening, or is that a part of this debate?
Yeah, well, they like to use Florida as an example in the Louisiana state legislature, because I think DeSantis recently came out and said that they saw reductions in rates of anywhere from 7 to 10%, and as reported by the insurance companies. And I did a very informal poll because I said, okay, is this true? And so I called all my friends in Florida, so maybe 15 people, and I asked, did anybody get a rate reduction? None.
None of the 15.
So I don't know.
Are these lawyers, non-lawyers?
They're all lawyers.
Yeah.
For the most part, they're lawyers.
But you were asking about their property and their auto.
I just asked them generally. I go, have y'all seen any reduction in your rates? And if they ask me, are you talking about property or auto? Because they all say no across the board.
Yeah.
It's not a scientific study, but you would think if and I had, and one of my friends who was there is a plaintiff lawyer, but also very involved in state bar association leadership. And he thought that the numbers were made up somehow. Not necessarily made up, but he doesn't know where they got them. He says he doesn't think they're accurate. He hasn't heard of anybody who've gotten reductions. And in fact, in their legislature right now, they have a whole bunch of buyer's remorse for following these tort reform measures because they are the claims that have been that are paid in Florida are down significantly, because one of the things they did in Florida on the property side was they took away the right to have a contingency fee for a lawyer representing a person who has had damage to their home and the insurance company hasn't fairly compensated them, at least
Right.
in the policyholder's mind. So they've lost us as lawyers. Most of them can't afford to pay us by the hour.
Right.
And so they've lost the ability to challenge the insurance company, which shows you why claims paid are down significantly. So the legislature is now looking into this in Florida. And I don't know that Florida, I don't think there's enough data to really dig in on that yet. But I think you're going to hear a lot about it in our legislature. And it's just I don't know how to combat it because it's still so fresh.
Yeah.
But what happened in Florida led Georgia to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And Georgia just passed laws at the end of sometime in 2024, beginning of 2025 that are similar. So it's a movement of trying to limit policyholder rights throughout the country in the hopes of retaining businesses in the state based on information that is sold to the legislatures by the businesses, that they're going to move if X doesn't happen and Y doesn't happen. I mean, if you've been to Atlanta, nobody's moving. Atlanta is booming.
Yeah. Well, I don't guess it has anything to do with Governor DeSantis needing insurance industry money to run for president, or Governor Kemp needing insurance industry money to run for Senate when his Georgia term as governor is up, right?
I'm sure it has nothing to do with any of that.
Okay. All right. Why don't you tell everybody, if you could, Brian, a little bit before we conclude about what's going on in Baton Rouge right now. What is the solution from your perspective to help lower auto rates, and kind of what everybody can do to get more educated on this, get informed, and be a part of this discussion and what's happening right now in the legislature?
So I think this kind of came to a head last week in, I believe it was in the Louisiana House Insurance Committee. There was a bill that was presented by Representative Robbie Carter and I think Representative Chad Brown is the one who presented it. And it was essentially to give the Commissioner of Insurance, Tim Temple, at least now, more power to regulate insurance companies, and to when a profit is deemed excessive, to be able to lower that profit so our premiums are then lowered.
And the commissioner did used to have this level of authority, right?
The commissioner of Louisiana used to have rate caps they could use. They used to be able to deem rates excessive. They used to have a lot more powers than they do now. That was kind of taken away. And our present commissioner of insurance isn't in favor of more power. Yeah. He doesn't think that's the solution. But
First
the governor,
time I've ever seen a politician, like the governor said, not be in favor of power. And I saw somebody online, a defense attorney, say, "Well, that just shows he's in it for the right reasons." So, okay,
right, exactly. So, and the governor's got a different approach. The governor, and let me back up a second. What Louisiana Association for Justice did is these hearings that happened in the fall of 2024 and early into 2025 talked about a lot of tort, auto, quote unquote, reform, civil justice reforms as solutions to the problem. We, as an association, were asked, well, if these things don't work, what do we do? Well, we're lawyers. We are not insurance regulators. I will admit that I know more about insurance regulation now than I ever wanted to know, and I still didn't scratch the surface. So what we did was we went out and found an expert, like we do in our cases.
In our cases, yeah.
We found an expert to look at what's going on in Louisiana, compare us to our neighbors, compare us to countrywide, look at the regulations, and make some determinations of what we can do to help reduce rates.
And so the association paid for it, right?
Yes.
And then you provided this to the legislators so they could see it and review it and read it. Is
Correct.
that fair? Okay.
Correct. And we didn't tell, much like you want a good opinion from an expert. We don't tell someone this is what the outcome we want. We want you to do an independent review. You tell us are we right or are we wrong about tort reform, about regulation, more regulations needed? And he came back and told and presented to the legislature, I think it was either a combination of House civil justice or House insurance or one or the other, and put together a 76-page report where he looked through everything and basically concluded, look, tort reform would have a very, very, very minimal effect, if any, on rates. But things like roads,
infrastructure,
truck safety, trucking issues are huge in Louisiana. What kind of safety equipment can we put on trucks that will allow them to be safer? Things like we talked about releasing information on expenses of insurance companies so that they can be more competitive if it's publicly available and transparent, and giving the commissioner more regulatory power to look at the rates, dig in, and say, hey, XYZ insurance company, you're making 40 cents on every dollar.
Yeah.
And ABC insurance is only making 20 cents on every dollar. So you clearly can reduce your rate to be fairer to the people, and that would drive competition.
Yeah. And
we have plenty of competition, but like you said, it's essentially a state mandated service.
Yeah.
We all are required to do it under penalty of law. And if we don't have insurance and we get caught, our car can be impounded and the like. So you've got to have it. So it's not like selling groceries where it's totally, everybody needs food to eat, but it's not like that in that that competition can be open. So there's a whole bunch of things. Truck safety is a big thing. Size of trucks. We have the biggest trucks.
I read that in the report.
In Louisiana,
I didn't know that.
as compared to our neighboring states. They allow, and when you have a bigger and a heavier truck, it's harder to stop.
Yeah.
And so there's
the impact's larger too.
Impacts are bigger. Damages are bigger. Look at our weather.
Yep.
You've had these pileups on I-55 when it gets foggy. Usually it's caused, not all, but a lot of times lately it's been caused by a big 18-wheeler who can't stop.
Yeah.
Or a big truck who can't stop and piles in, and you have 50 cars involved in an accident.
I do wonder too, Brian, your perspective before we kind of go, because we could go on for this probably a whole nother show. You're busy. We have a pretty high rate of uninsured drivers in Louisiana. And I think from a common sense perspective, I always tell people you need to buy UM because the insurance company doesn't want to sell it to you, but you need it because you need to protect you and your family in case the other driver doesn't have insurance or is underinsured. But UM is a problem for the carriers in their defense because it's very hard for them to underwrite it because what uninsured motorist coverage is doing is they're selling me or you a product for a risk of another driver that they don't really know who it is. And I feel like that I have no empirical data to support this, but I feel like our rate of uninsured motorists in the state has some impact on our rates as well because they're losing more money on the UM side because we have so many underinsured and uninsured drivers on the liability side. That may not be right whatsoever. It's just a random theory of mine. I'm curious about your thoughts on it.
No, I think you're right. I heard a stat recently, and I can't recall what percentage of the state of our drivers are uninsured, but it was more than 10%.
I thought it was like 11 and a half, and
so
it was scary to think that many people are uninsured.
So it's a big issue, and that's a big issue for us. And there's a lot of issues like that, little issues that add up.
Yeah.
That we can come up with solutions for that would help us reduce rates significantly, rather than the civil justice issues that have been tried since 1975 and have failed since 1975.
And I have people who ask me all the time too, like, well, Vic, what happens if, like, friends, if I get in a wreck and they don't have insurance, like, what happens to them? I'm like, pretty much nothing. Like, so if there were some laws I feel like that were more criminally enforceable and actually prosecuted, and or take away their like license, like things like that, there's got to be a way to get. We're never going to get to 0% uninsured, right? But like if we could chip away at 3 or 4% of that, for example, with laws that put more drivers on the road insured, I think that would have some level of impact. It may not be the leverage, but it would be something, in my opinion.
No, I agree. I mean, I just found the solutions that this expert from the former commissioner of insurance from Missouri came up with, and it's strengthening Louisiana insurance rating law.
From the commissioner's perspective, yeah.
Which would include authorizing the commissioner to fine rates excessive, either before or after they take effect, not allowing insurance companies to unilaterally determine whether information can be withheld from the public, because when they submit stuff, insurance companies can say, hey, this is not for public consumption. Yeah. Require insurance to demonstrate that the rating factors they use are related to risk rather than credit scores, gender, and things that you would think they're not have anything to do with how good a driver you are, but are still being used. And then to publish premium comparisons and to maximize transparency is one piece. You know, the roads we talked about. We talked about truck safety, which is, things like. So here's that stat about trucks in weight in Louisiana versus other places, but trucks are 20 to 30 times as much as cars. Their braking capability is easily deteriorate between driver fatigue, defective equipment. All these things can be solved. You know, you can improve safety standards. You can deal with dangerous roads that we have. We know which roads are dangerous in Louisiana, yet we do nothing to fix them. And accidents happen over and over and over again. The length and weight limits that we have of trucks here exceed our neighboring states. We have 18-year-olds who are allowed to drive big trucks in Louisiana, and it's not that way in other states. Yeah, they have to be older. And then, driver-assisted technology, dash cams, telematics, things like that, lane assist that we all, in the newer cars, we have those things. It's all available. And industry fights that because it's expensive for them to implement it. But think how much they would save on insurance premiums after their initial capital.
Well, I had a friend who works at a very big labor company, and they are debating putting the dash cams on. He wanted to know my opinion. I was like, absolutely. And we're at a Thanksgiving party, and so we've had a couple of alcoholic drinks. And so he's like, "Oh, well, you're just saying that because you want them for your cases." I'm like, "Of course I do, but I also think they're good for the public. More cameras, better." Like, so if you think you have fraudulent claims in for the company, like, the cameras help you. Like, it ferrets out frivolous, fraudulent claims because it shows that the other driver was at fault, or that there was not really an accident when somebody says there is. And that happens, okay? Like, there are always going to be fraudulent people in the world. Let's not act like there aren't. I think a lot of that stuff's good. I'm in favor of I think there's a bill going through potentially that makes distracted driving huge issue. I mean, you drive on our interstates right now. We don't cause the wrecks, you and me. We represent people who are injured in them, but like, I don't cause them. But if you drive down the road and you look in the cars next to you, you see the people on their phones driving. So, I mean, I think there's a bill to make that illegal. Huge in favor of that. I think that has some ability to help reduce wrecks because people are looking at Instagram and email, and I think at some level all of us have been responsible for that at some level or not, but like, it really is a danger to look down at your phone. So in any event, off my soliloquy of that, it's been incredible having you, Brian, and I know you're super busy and we're in this legislative session that you're very involved in, but just in conclusion, could you just kind of tell our listeners a little bit about if they want to get involved, and how they can become informed about this particular issue and all this stuff going on in Baton Rouge surrounding it? Yeah,
so it's tough to kind of sift through the weeds of that and give you a definitive answer. If you're a lawyer, contact LAJ.
Right.
Get involved with LAJ. Follow what we're doing. We in New Orleans, we have this regional committee where the lawyers get together and we try to do it quarterly and talk about issues that are going on, whether it's locally or statewide. There is a really good resource for everybody, lawyers, general public, called Real Reform. and I think it's realreform.com or realreform.org, but it's REALREFORM. And it is a insurance watchdog group that focuses on Louisiana and focuses on our insurance issues and tries to shed a light on what insurance companies are doing, what's going on at the legislature, what's going on with our premiums, what's going on with the commissioner of insurance, what's going on with the governor, all of that stuff. So Real Reform is a great resource. You can sign up for their newsletter. They will get you information on a weekly basis or daily basis, depending on what's going on up there. Yeah. And they'll tell you, hey, look, this is what happened today at the legislature. This is why your rates are so high. This is why, if it was true, if this is why civil justice reform doesn't work, this is why regulation does work. Yeah, things like that. So that's probably the easiest way to get involved. The Louisiana legislature actually has a very good website, and if you can figure out which committee a certain bill is in, you can watch it. I watch it live. I watch it at my desk when I'm not up there. And I watch committee hearings, and you can read the texts of bills. You can see amendments. You can see where things are going. So that's also good, but you got to really sift through the weeds. So that the Real Reform thing is probably the best thing from a general public perspective that anybody can do.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here, Brian. As I said, a great trial lawyer and the president of LAJ. I know how busy you are being involved with all these issues going on in Baton Rouge right now. So we appreciate you taking some time to talk with us. Our listeners can become more informed on this topic. I giggled when you just said it because it's true. This is a dense topic. I mean, it's tough to dig through the weeds. I've been sifting through it and all in it the last 2 weeks because it's tough to understand what is real and what isn't. And when people ask me, I want to be informed and be able to tell them some of these things and understand it. And I still can't find the insurance company's expenses. And now I have an answer why, because they won't give it to us. So hopefully that bill will pass and they'll have to give it to us. And then we can have a real discussion on why our rates are so high.
Let's hope.
All right. So it's wonderful having you with us, Brian. And thanks to all of you once again for listening along. This has been another great and interesting episode of the Overrule Podcast brought to you by the Scott McNair Law Firm. We will see you next time. Thanks a lot.
Scott McNair, injury attorneys, we fight for the win.
Information is for illustrative purposes only and does not constitute tax, investment, or legal advice. Always consult with a qualified investment, legal, or tax professional before taking any action.